All alcohol explained in 10 minutes.
And most widely consumed alcoholic drink in the world, with evidence of brewing dating back over 13.
Wait.
Beer. Beer is the oldest and most widely consumed alcoholic drink in the world, with evidence of brewing dating back over 13,000 years to the Natufian people in what is now Jordan. The basic process has never changed. Grain, usually barley, is malted, mashed with water, boiled with hops, then fermented with yeast. The yeast eats the sugars and produces alcohol and carbon dioxide. What changes between styles is everything else. The type of grain, the roast level, the hop variety, the yeast strain, and the fermentation temperature all determine whether you end up with a pale lager, a stout, or a sour. Budweiser, the best-selling beer in American history, is brewed with rice alongside barley to produce a lighter, crisper taste. Germany's purity law from 1516, the Reinheitsgebot, still influences German brewing today, restricting ingredients to water, barley, and hops. Globally, over 2 billion hectoliters of beer are produced every year. Wine. Wine is simply fermented grape juice, but the variation
Wine is
between
so
a $10
trash,
bottle and a $10,000 bottle comes down to terroir, a French concept describing the combination of soil, climate, slope angle, and even the surrounding vegetation that makes grapes from one place taste different from anywhere else. The oldest known winery was found in a cave in Armenia, dating back 6,100 years. Red
Damn.
wine gets its color from the
People
grape
love
skins,
getting
which are left
drunk,
in
man.
contact with the juice during fermentation. White wine is made by removing the skins before fermentation. Rosé is made either by brief skin contact or by blending. A bottle of wine contains roughly 700 to 750 milliliters, which comes from a historical standard set by the maximum lung capacity of a glassblower. Champagne can only legally be called champagne if it comes from the Champagne region of France. Everything else is sparkling wine. Whiskey. Whiskey is a distilled spirit made from
What? I didn't know that. It can only be called champagne if it comes from Champagne. If it comes from anywhere else, it's just sparkling wine.
region of France. Everything else is sparkling
Interesting.
wine. Whiskey. Whiskey is a distilled spirit made from fermented grain mash, barley, corn, rye, or wheat, then aged in wooden barrels. The barrel does most of the work. Up to 70% of whiskey's final flavor comes from the wood during aging. American bourbon must be made from at least 51% corn, aged in new charred oak barrels, and cannot enter the barrel at more than
I hate
125 proof. Scotch whiskey, spelled without the E, must be aged in Scotland for at least 3 years in oak casks. Irish whiskey is triple distilled, which is why it tastes smoother than most Scotch. Japanese whiskey began in the 1920s when a man named Masataka Taketsuru traveled to Scotland, studied distilling, came home, and built Japan's first whiskey distillery. Japanese whiskey is now considered among the finest in the world. The angel's share refers to the roughly 2% of whiskey that evaporates from the barrel each year during aging. Vodka. Vodka is the world's best-selling spirit. It can be distilled from almost anything: grain, potatoes, grapes, or even milk. The word vodka comes from the Slavic word voda, meaning water, and is essentially a diminutive, little water. Russia and Poland have argued for centuries over which country invented it. The earliest written records appear in Poland in the 8th century, but Russia's claim is equally documented. Modern vodka is typically distilled multiple times and filtered through activated charcoal to remove impurities and produce the neutral, clean flavor it is known for. Grey Goose, one of the most recognized premium vodkas globally, is made in France from soft winter wheat and spring water filtered through champagne limestone. At the other end, Stolichnaya was the official Soviet state vodka, produced under tight government control. Vodka's neutrality is precisely what makes it the base for so many cocktails. It adds alcohol without competing flavors. Rum. Rum is made from sugarcane, either fresh sugarcane juice
That's the
or
point.
molasses, the thick, dark byproduct left after refining sugar. It was born in the Caribbean in the 1620s when plantation workers discovered that molasses, previously thrown away, could be fermented and distilled. Rum became the fuel of the Atlantic slave trade. Ships carried rum from the
Bacardi
Caribbean to
good.
Africa,
Bacardi
traded it
silver?
for enslaved people, transported those people to the Americas, and returned loaded with sugar and molasses. The triangle ran for over 150 years. Dark rum gets its color from aging in charred oak barrels, often the same ones used for bourbon. White rum is typically unaged or aged very briefly, then filtered clear. Bacardi, founded in Cuba in 1862, is the best-selling rum brand in the world and one of the best-selling spirits of any kind. Cuban rum is legally restricted from being sold in the United States due to trade embargoes that have been in place since 1962. Gin.
That's crazy.
Gin is a neutral spirit flavored primarily with juniper berries and a combination of other botanicals: citrus peel, coriander, angelica root, cardamom,
Gin
and
and juice.
dozens of other possible ingredients. Juniper is not optional. Legally, gin must
toxic.
taste predominantly of juniper, or it cannot be called gin. The drink was invented in the Netherlands in the 17th century as a medicine, where it was called Genever. British soldiers fighting in the Dutch Republic drank it before battle for courage, bringing it back to England, where it became wildly popular. In 1720s London, gin consumption became so catastrophic, an epidemic known as the gin craze, that Parliament passed 5 separate acts trying to control it. Around 11 million gallons were consumed annually in a city of 600,000 people. Today, over 70 70% of the world's gin is produced in the United Kingdom. The recent craft gin explosion has produced over 500 distilleries in the UK alone, more than at any point in history. Tequila. Tequila can only legally be made in 5 Mexican states, with Jalisco as the primary region, and only from the blue agave plant. The plant takes 7 to 10 years to mature before it can be harvested. The heart of the plant, called the piña, can weigh up to 150 kilograms. It is roasted, crushed, fermented, and distilled to produce tequila. Blanco tequila is unaged, bottled within 60 days of distillation. Reposado is aged between 2 and 12 months in oak barrels. Añejo is aged between 1 and 3 years. Extra Añejo is aged more than 3 years, and was only officially recognized as a category in 2006. The worm found in some bottles is actually in mezcal, not tequila, and is a marketing invention from the 1940s rather than a tradition. The agave plant dies after being harvested, which is why wild agave populations have declined significantly due to tequila's global popularity surge. Champagne. Champagne is produced using a method called méthode champenoise, in which wine undergoes a second fermentation inside the bottle, trapping carbon dioxide and creating bubbles. The pressure inside a champagne bottle is roughly 3 times the pressure inside a car tire. Dom Perignon, the Benedictine monk often credited with inventing champagne, almost certainly did not invent it. The method was documented in England before any French records. What Dom Perignon did contribute was improving the blending of grapes and using thicker bottles that could withstand the pressure. Riddling is the process of gradually rotating and tilting bottles over weeks or months to collect dead yeast sediment in the neck, which is then frozen and ejected. Mechanical riddling machines, invented in the 1970s, now do in 8 hours what once took 6 weeks by hand. Champagne houses own some of the most valuable vineyard land in the world, with a single hectare in the Côte des Blancs selling for upwards of 2 million euros. Sake. Sake is a Japanese rice wine, though calling it wine is technically misleading. Wine is made by fermenting the sugars that occur naturally in fruit. Sake is made by converting rice starch into sugar, first using a mold called koji, then fermenting those sugars simultaneously. This parallel fermentation process is unique to sake and makes it technically closer to beer in its production method. The alcohol content of sake is typically between 15 and 22%, higher than most wines and beer. The grade of sake is determined in part by how much of the rice grain has been milled away before brewing. Junmai Daiginjo, the highest grade, requires that at least 50% of each grain be polished off before use. The discarded rice is not wasted. It is sold for food or used in other products. Sake has been brewed in Japan for at least 2,000 years and was historically associated with Shinto rituals. Japan exports sake to over 60 countries, with the United States and China being the largest markets. Absinthe. Absinthe is a high-proof spirit made from wormwood, anise, and fennel. For nearly a century, it was banned across much of Europe and the United States. The prohibition was driven by the belief that thujone, a compound found in wormwood, caused hallucinations and madness. The Green Fairy, as it was called, was blamed for everything from Van Gogh cutting off his ear to increased crime rates in France. Modern chemical analysis of pre-ban absinthe bottles has shown that thujone levels were far too low to cause any psychoactive effect. The real culprit was probably just alcohol. Genuine absinthe is typically between 45 and 74% alcohol by volume. France banned it in 1915. The United States banned it in 1912. Both countries only lifted the ban in 2007 and 2009, respectively. Absinthe is not drunk neat. Traditionally, a sugar cube is placed on a slotted spoon over the glass. Ice-cold water is slowly dripped over it, dissolving the sugar into the spirit. The drink turns cloudy, a reaction called the louche. Mead. Mead is the world's oldest known fermented drink, predating both beer and wine by thousands of years. It is made by fermenting honey dissolved in water, sometimes with fruits, spices, or grains added. Archaeological evidence of mead has been found in China dating back 9,000 years. In ancient Norse mythology, mead was the drink of gods and warriors, believed to confer wisdom and poetic inspiration. The Great Mead Hall in Viking culture was the center of social life. The term honeymoon comes from the tradition of giving newlyweds a month's supply of mead, one full moon cycle, after their wedding, as honey was believed to promote fertility. Mead virtually disappeared in Europe after the Middle Ages, when wine and beer became cheaper to produce due to access to large-scale grape and grain farming. The modern craft mead revival is one of the fastest-growing segments of the alcohol industry in the United States, with over 500 meaderies now operating compared to fewer than 30 in 2003. Soju. Soju is the best-selling spirit in the world by volume, not whiskey, not vodka. Soju, in 2023, the brand Jinro alone sold over 78 million cases, more than any other spirit brand on earth. It is a Korean distilled spirit traditionally made from rice, though modern commercial versions use sweet potatoes, wheat, or tapioca due to rice shortages during the Korean War. Soju typically contains between 16 and 25% alcohol, significantly lower than most Western spirits, which makes it easier to drink in large quantities through Korea's culturally embedded sophisticated drinking rituals. It is almost always drunk neat, in small glasses, and refilling a companion's empty glass is considered a social obligation. The distinctive green bottle design used by Jinro and Chumchurum is so culturally ingrained in Korea that it has become a design icon. Soju is now expanding internationally, particularly in the United States and Southeast Asia, where Korean pop culture has dramatically increased its visibility. Bitters. Bitters are concentrated botanical liquids, not really meant to be drunk straight, but essential to cocktail culture. They are made by macerating herbs, roots, bark, flowers, and spices in high-proof alcohol. Angostura bitters, named after a city in Venezuela, have been made in Trinidad since 1824. The recipe is known by only 5 people at any given time. A single dash, roughly half a milliliter, transforms the flavor profile of an entire cocktail. Angostura bitters come in bottles where the paper label is famously too large, wrapping over the top of the glass. This is not a design choice. When the company submitted a bottle design and a label design in a competition in the 1800s, the two departments worked independently and produced mismatched sizes. They lost the competition but kept the aesthetic. Peychaud's bitters, created by a Creole apothecary named Antoine Amédée Peychaud in New Orleans in the 1830s, are the key ingredient in the Sazerac cocktail, considered by many to be the oldest American cocktail still made today.
Nice. That was a good video, chat.